You know, Webster defines the word confidence as that in which faith is put. And you know something? That certainly applies to the sport of fishing. Confidence in your ability to locate fish and catch them is by far the greatest lure you've got in your tackle box. You've got to have complete confidence in what you're doing and the lure you're using. It's a mental attitude to be sure, but it can make all the difference in the world in catching fish or not catching fish. Unfortunately, the majority of fishermen pay only lip service to this vital ingredient. Yet, if you were given the opportunity to chat with the top tournament bass fishermen, you'd quickly realize that every one of them has some degree of confidence in his approach to the sport. The fact that one man or woman might swear by spinnerbaits, or another a crankbait, and another a topwater lure, while another favors a plastic worm, doesn't distract from this confidence. Neither does it matter whether the angler chooses to fish bow docks, or a bluff, a point, the shoreline, a grass line, or even open water. Each of them believes that what he or she is doing will produce bass for them. To be successful at bass fishing, you got to work at it. There's no miracle methods, no secret lures, and no shortcuts to the thrill of a strike. That's why your attitude must always be positive. You got to believe that every move you make will be a correct one. You got to believe that every time you make that cast, you're going to catch a fish. Naturally, you're not going to, but you've got to have that mental attitude and believe that you're going to do it. It's not easy to have confidence all the time because you can't really fool yourself into thinking you have it. Instead, it's a vital ingredient, as I said earlier, that you work at developing the mental attitude that's so important. You know, the ultimate is never to get discouraged and to continue to believe that your approach is the best one for you. If you fail on a given day, review the procedures. Go back and think about what you did and the tight places you fish. Go through the mental exercises and profit from your experience. Tell yourself that the next time will be different. And above all, never lose sight of the fact that the reason you love bass fishing is because your quarry is so unpredictable. There will be times when you can't get your lure in the water fast enough, and there will be other times when you can't buy a strike regardless of what you do. You know, if bass fishing were routine, you'd soon tire of it. Confidence also extends to the lure you're using. To fish a lure effectively and efficiently, you must first believe in your own mind that the lure you're fishing is the right one. Obviously, if you don't have faith in your lure, your casts are going to be less accurate and your presentation mechanical. And chances are, you're going to be spending more time changing lures and worrying about that than actually fishing. You know, you gain confidence through experience and understanding, and it all starts with a comprehension of the habits and the habitats of your quarry, which, in turn, dictates how and where you should fish, and the tackle and lure you should use. Now, speaking of lures, since our show is devoted to cranking bass today, let me ask you a couple of questions. Is it true that all crankbaits are created equal? And is it true that a crankbait is a crankbait is a crankbait is a crankbait? Well, the answer to both of those questions is a big fat no. It is true, however, that some crankbaits catch more fish than others, and there's reasons for this. For instance, some reflect and flash more than others, some possess more vibration than the others, some offer better action and buoyancy than others. Now take this one here. It hosts all four of those important elements to catch fish on a fairly consistent basis. It's called a dancing shad, and it's made of an exotic wood called julia tongue. This type wood is extremely tough as a result of the grainless cellulose fiber, which makes for a lure to run true and have superb durability. And it's the bait our show is tailored to today. And it's a lure I've got a tremendous amount of confidence in. And I'd like to share with you some helpful tips I've learned over the years about fishing deep diving crankbaits. Now, when I say deep diving, I don't want to imply that that's the only way fish can be caught on it, deep, because it can be highly productive in a shallow environment, which we'll discuss shortly. But first, let's go and get it wet. Over the past few weeks, we've had the opportunity to fish here several times, and the bass we've been catching have been in a depth of about 8 to 12 feet, scattered here and there primarily along channel points, secondary banks, channel banks, where submerged cover is present. There he is. Better fish right there, feels like. Woo, yeah. What are you gonna do there, old big boy? You gonna get me to my knees too? Come on back here. That is another big old gutted thing. Come here. Oh, that hook's about to come out of your face. Just about game out. Look at that. Oh, it was in there better than I thought. Not too shitty, my boy. Alright, here we go. You know, I think one of the greatest advantages to fishing a bait of this type is the vast amount of water you can cover with it, especially when fish are using a depth, say a depth pattern of 1 to 15 feet. In fact, the versatility of a crankbait is really limited only by the imagination and the cleverness of the user. This lure can be modified in so many different ways to fit the needs of the moment. You know, I just said how productive a bait like this can be in depths, let's say up to 15 feet, but by making one little change to a very well balanced lure that provides superb flotation, you can work it as deep as you desire. By adding 1/4 to a 3/8 ounce slip sinker to your line and pegging it in front of the lip, you can cast the lure out and count it down to the exact depth, or even let it settle to the bottom and then begin working it in. This technique has worked for me many times, especially when bass were deeper than my lure would dive. In fact, this method has done a great job for me in depths of 18 to 30 to 35 feet. Hey, look at here. Man. What are you doing, old boy? You're all that big, but you're cutting up like you're something showing up big. Come here. You got those hooks all over your face. Be careful. Ooh. Boy, you felt a lot bigger. See ya. You know, most crankbait fishermen know how to tune a bait to make it run straight and true. But for those of you that don't, let's talk a little bit about tuning your crankbait. If by chance the lure runs off to the right when you're retrieving it, hold the lure with its lip facing you and slightly bend the line eye, not the O-ring, to the left. And if the lure runs off to the left, bend the line eye to the right, a fraction of an inch. This will move the line eye back in line with the center of the lure, balancing it and letting or allowing the bait to run straight. Hello. Come here. Easy. Boy, you get it all in your mouth. There ain't no way I can get my hand in your face without. He had it right in the bottom lip. But he had it. And he had it good. Easy now. I'm not going to hurt you. Oh, you got that hook in a bad spot where my hand is. Don't jump. Just be easy. There we go. Say bye. Goodbye. I know you're happy now. You know, I mentioned a little bit earlier, just because you've got a deep diving crankbait, now this doesn't mean that it won't produce fish for you in shallow water. You can make them dance and dart on or just beneath the surface. By holding your rod tip high, using a stop and go retrieve, you can run this particular lure much slower and much shallower. Now, my most productive technique in fishing a lure like this in shallow water is to keep the rod tip high on the retrieve and pull the lure rather than reel it. Now let me show you how that's done. In other words, I'm going to cast the bait out if I'm fishing in a shallow area. 4 or 5 kind of turns to just start the bait. Not 4 or 5 fast turns, just 4 or 5 turns to get the bait started. And then I'm going to pull it. Here's my rod tip. I'm going to pull and take up the slack. I'm going to pull and take up the slack. I can fish this bait much slower fishing it this way with the rod. In other words, I pull, then I take up the slack. I'm pulling, taking up the slack. It's a highly productive way of fishing a deep diving crankbait in shallow water. In other words, make the cast and you pull the lure rather than reel the lure along. You know, now in fishing this particular bait in deeper depths, what you want to do is vary your retrieve. And I'm totally convinced that an erratic retrieve is much more productive than, let's say, a steady one. First of all, it's best to make a long cast when possible. Turn the handle 4 or 5 turns to get the bait started down. And then use a moderate to slow retrieve to drive the bait deeper. Now, many anglers believe that with the high-speed reels that are on the market today, the faster you burn that reel, the deeper you're going to drive this particular type of bait. Well, that's totally wrong, and let me show you why. On a deep diving crankbait, what takes place for this bait to reach its maximum depth? Water must flow off the right and the left side of the lip for it to dive to its maximum depth. But if you start burning the bait, fishing it at a high rate of speed, what takes place then? Water pressure builds up on the lip and the water flow begins to come off the front of the lip, affecting the depth that the bait will dive. And it comes through the water more like a wet stick. It maintains just a certain depth, and all that pressure pushes this bait forward, and it comes through the water more in a dead stick effect. So, to get this bait to go to its maximum depth, a moderate, slow, to just a slow type retrieve is going to drive the bait much deeper than it would by actually trying to burn the bait. So, when you fish it that way, for the bait to reach its maximum depth in warmer water, this bait's going to run with about 14-pound test. I'd say it'd run about 10 feet deep on a long cast. But you can make it run much deeper by adding that slip sinker to it like we talked about. Okay, now, once I get the lure down, as I said, 4 or 5 fast turns to get it down. All right, once I get it down, I say 4 or 5 fast turns to get the bait started down, then a moderate type retrieve, moderate to slow type retrieve is going to drive the bait much, much slower. Now, once I get it down to the bottom or to the desired depth, what I want to do, I want to vary the speed from a slow to a fast retrieve, to a slow to retrieve, maybe even to a stop, to even a jerking type retrieve. And what I'm doing, I'm trying to mix this up until I establish the most productive method. And I find that most times, once the lure is down, when I change one action into another, is when the strike occurs. And I also find that the majority of big bass that I've caught on baits of this type is usually when I use that slower presentation, like a slow retrieve to a stop, to a fast, to a slow, to a stop. Now, the fish that we picked up right in this area are hitting this bait on a stop and go type retrieve, but the stop and go is not a fast stop and go. In other words, I'm running the bait fairly slow and then I stop it and then I pick the bait back up again. I stop it, and as I start it up again, he either hits it as it stopped or just as I start to move the bait again. So the presentation on a bait of this type is very, very critical. You want to mix it up. 4 or 5 fast turns to get it started down, and then a slower retrieve will send it deeper. And then that's when you want to start changing the actions. From a little bit faster retrieve, you slow it down to a stop, speed it up a little bit, stop it, slow retrieve, fast retrieve. Just keep mixing it up. And when you, there he is right there. When you first feel that hit, I had stopped it right there and the fish followed it. Get in here, man. What happened on that fish, I was kind of burning it, and as I stopped it right here is when he hit it. So there's days they're going to hit it when you're moving it at a slow, steady pace. There's going to be days when you stop it, they're going to hit it better. There's going to be days when you fish it a little bit faster. But fast is not always the answer. Now, that fish hit that bait perfectly still. I got it down, and I just stopped it like that right there. There's nothing. They just seem like they want it when you stop it. You're about to get off, you just go ahead and jump off. And on the outside of the face. See, a lot of times you can run that crankbait, and if you run it, you can be running it right by a fish, and they won't hit it. You've got to get a particular technique, presentation for them. Now, what I just did, I'm running it like 4 or 5 fast turns, and then I slow it down, and I'm driving it on down. And then I'm going to stop it right there. Then I'll start it up again. By changing that action, it's so important. Four or 5 fast turns to get it started, and I'll drive it on deeper with that slower presentation. There you go. Hit it still. Come on up here. Come on in here. Easy, 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 easy. Now he hit it just perfectly still. So you can run that bait, like I was just saying. If I just continued to reel it, it's very unlikely that many fish would hit it. It seems like they want it. Run it, then stop it. And just as it starts to float up, it's got a good action when it floats up. It kind of Z's its way back up. Or when I first start it up again, it's when they get it. But it's almost, I'm going to stop it right there. I'll start it up. Stop it. But when I stop it, bottom I guess, when I stop it, what I want to do, I want to have my rod in a position where I can set that hook. I don't want to have that rod up over my head because I won't have any leverage. Tell you what, I want you to look at these 2 words. It says depth control. And that's one of the 2 most important controls a fisherman has at his disposal. If the lure is not worked on the fish's depth, chances are he may not hit it unless he's extremely active. Getting the lure down to his depth level is just as important as making an accurate cast to him. In deeper water, bass can become very reluctant to come up off the bottom and take a free-swimming crankbait. But a lure bumping the bottom leaves a mud trail, and the sound of the lure hitting the bottom attracts fish. This 3-inch jelly tongue bait looks natural on the bottom and stimulates a predator response from fish. Excellent depth control is one of the most important advantages of this bait. Whoa, baby. Good. Nice hard pulling thing. Got hooks all in his face. Man. A few minutes ago, I asked you to look at 2 words, depth control. And I mentioned it was one of 2 of the most important controls a fisherman has at his disposal. The other control is speed control. The key word here is control. You gotta be in control of your lure at all times, concentrating on every move that bait makes, and in tune with the speed and the action of the lure. But in cold water, retrieve speeds are much slower because fish are much more sluggish. In other words, if the water is 48 degrees, the fish's body temperature is going to be the same as the surrounding water around him. So in colder water, fish do become sluggish. But in warmer water, your retrieve speeds will be faster. But as I said, during the warmer months, fast retrieves are not always the answer. You got to vary your retrieve to determine the fish's mood at that time. Now here's something you might find interesting. A crankbait of this type will run deeper in warmer water than it will in cold water, and your feel of the lure will be much more sensitive in warmer water than it will be in cold water. Now the reason for this is because warmer water is thinner, allowing the lure to dive and swim more freely. Cold water is much more dense or thick, restricting both depth and feel to a degree. There he is. Wow. All right, right in the bottom lip again. Well, I've never caught so many fish in the bottom lip. It makes it tough to pick him up. I'll tell you what, I gotta be careful with this thing. Highly dangerous. You know, before we caught that last fish, we were talking about water temperature. You know, it's a known fact that warmer water increases a fish's metabolism while colder water slows it down, making him less active. Now, in warmer water, let's say above 70 degrees, bass are going to feed more often and more aggressively. They're going to digest their food faster, and they tend to feed on larger bait fish too. That's why bigger baits are so much more attractive and productive. You know, I've said this no less than 100 times, and I honestly believe that big lures will catch larger bass than smaller lures most of the time. Now, this isn't to say that a big fish won't hit a small bait, because they do feed on small baits. But I say the majority of the time, I honestly feel that larger baits are more attractive. Why? Because big baits create a bigger image in the water. They create more sound, they look more appealing, and I know if I'm hungry, I'd 10 times rather eat an apple than I would a grape. Naturally, if both were available, I'd probably eat them both. But the apple would first catch my eye. Now, another advantage to a larger lure is that there's more room for contact and less margin for error. Example, I can see a basketball going through the air much easier than I could, let's say, a golf ball. Another thing, I could catch the basketball a lot easier than I could catch the golf ball. Good. Nice, hard pulling thing. What are you gonna do there, hot shot? You're gonna get a hook in my finger. Be careful. Little potted thing. You know, as we stated, correct presentation and depth are vital to success. With the lure I'm using today, I can drop down in line weight to 10-pound test and reach deeper depths than normal on a long cast using a low-stretch co-filament. A 10-pound test or lighter weight monofilament will restrict depth control in feel due to the stretch factor. Lighter weight monofilament will stretch much more than heavier weights, and the nylon material used will absorb water quicker, affecting your cast, your control, your depth, and even sensitivity. Big lip crankbaits create a tremendous amount of resistance on the retrieve, causing more stretch in monofilament. But by using a co-filament line, the stretch factor is reduced 50%. And with a co-filament line, sensitivity is increased tremendously. Oh, you big horseshoe. Come on. That's a big old gutted baby there. You didn't feel that big when you first hit. Easy, easy, easy. Yes, sir. Well, you got it down in there too, didn't you? Not bad. Not too shabby. All right, it's time to grow. See you later. Here's another little tip that can make a lure of this type much more effective under certain conditions, like when you're fishing it in heavy cover, like around a submerged treetop, heavy bushes, a stump, or other hanging objects. We all know that bass prefer cover when it's available, and the thicker it is, the better it's going to be. And using a lure with 2 sets of treble hooks can keep you busy all day getting your bait unhung. The hook that hangs you up the most is the front hook on the forward treble. By bending this hook forward or even cutting it off will prevent many hang-ups. And it allows the lure to work and swim through heavy cover much more readily. You know, we talk about a crankbait running true, and we've talked about how to make that bait run true. If it runs off to the left, you bend the line eye back to the right. If it runs off to the right, you bend the line eye back to the left. But there's times that you might want to run an out-of-tune bait. Now that might sound silly, but it can be highly productive. By taking the bait and bending the line eye to the right, if you're holding the bait right at you, you bend the line out to the right, naturally the bait's going to run off to the left as you retrieve it in. And that's good, especially if you're fishing up under, say, around a boat dock, or wanting the bait to run up under a ledge, or run up under a drift. That's real good to do that. Bend it off, and that bait will run up under there 2 or 3 feet, enough sometimes to entice an inactive fish to charge out and hit it, where normally he might not come out into a lit area to take the bait. So by running an out-of-tune bait could be good, as I said, like fishing under low-hanging limbs, up under a ledge, around up under a boat dock, or any type of floating vegetation that you want the bait to run up under. So by just tuning it to run out of tune, you can accomplish that. Man, oh man, that's hard. Oh, that's a good one there. I mean, he's big. Look at that big gutted fish right here. Come up here. I'll get a hook in my hand. Come on, come on. Oh, aren't you something? Oh, easy. Man! Yeah! Boy! What a great fish to end the day. Good night! Do I like that? You pretty thing, you. I'll ease you down now. Go on. As he sinks away. Man! I really like that. Well, it's that time again, but before we crank ourselves out of here, I'd like to remind you what I said a little bit earlier about having that all-important thing called confidence. It's gained through experience and understanding, and it starts with a comprehension of the habits and the habitat of your quarry, which in turn dictates how and where you should fish, and the tackle and lure you should be using. From what you've seen in the last little while, maybe you'll agree that I've got a tremendous amount of confidence in this method of fishing and in this lure called the Dancing Shad.